Hey guys, I'm here with John Egan. How are you, John?
I'm doing well.
Where are you located?
I'm located in the San Francisco Bay Area in Silicon Valley.
Were you born and raised in San Francisco?
Yeah, I was born and raised in the Bay Area. Lived in San Diego for a few years before moving back after school.
So if you had to choose, any city, I know that you work at Pinterest right now. If you had to choose any city, maybe in the world where you would live, is that still the choice you would make, or would you prefer living in the beach somewhere?
Yeah, well, I think it depends. If I have to work, I don't think any place can beat San Francisco in terms of just like the amount of energy and things going on. If working isn't an issue, then retiring on some island in Greece sounds nice.
Why Greece?
I visited there for my honeymoon and just really enjoyed it. It's just very idyllic and relaxed.
I've heard a lot about Greece, from people that traveled to that country. I've been to other countries in Europe, but that's definitely one of the places I want to go see. It looks gorgeous, especially
Mhm.
the islands.
Yeah,
Okay. Would you live on one of the islands or
yeah.
in this?
You'd have to do one of the islands.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's jump right in. I'll give a bit of an intro for people that may not know you, and then we'll jump into questions. So, John Egan has been working in growth for over 7 years. He's currently working on the growth team at Pinterest, where he's the engineering manager for the notifications team, which focuses primarily on emails, push notifications, in product experiences aimed at increasing engagement. Previously, he led the growth engineering team at Shopkick, a cross-retailer mobile loyalty app, which was acquired for $200 million. He's helped to grow the user base eightfold, 8 times from 1 million users to 8 million users, primarily through invites, geofencing, and push notifications. So welcome to the Growth Hacking Geniuses series.
Thank you.
It's good to have you. We've been talking for a little while, and I've been definitely looking forward to have a chance to do this interview with you. Hopefully, we'll have a chance to, do some other videos maybe later on. But for now, I'll ask you a few questions so that people can get to know you a little bit more, and to give you a chance as well to share some insights and wisdom from your experiences. Cool.
Sounds good.
All right. So the first question I have for you is, how was your experience at Shopkick?
Yeah, so when I first joined Shopkick, I just joined as an engineer. The company didn't have a growth team yet. Worked on a few different kind of like back-end and infrastructure stuff. And about 2 to 3 months after I joined, the leadership team announced that they were going to start this thing called a growth team. It was 2011, like growth hacking had just kind of started to explode in popularity as a term. And when they announced they were starting this growth team, I thought it sounded like something that was interesting and something that I wanted to be involved with. So I went to the CTO, asked to get involved, and so I was one of the founding engineers on the growth team at Shopkick. Eventually became the tech lead for the team. And back then, there weren't really very many resources on how to go about growth. There weren't a lot of blogs out there. There weren't a lot of like people talking about growth at that time. So we had to learn things basically through trial and error, and just kind of like learn things on our own through making mistakes and figure out how to drive growth. And so it was definitely a really interesting experience, and I think it helped me just learn about like the right approach to growth just from like first principles and fundamentals of having like made mistakes and understanding why you shouldn't do things that way. And eventually, though, we started to get traction and were able to start really driving some results for the company's bottom line. And ultimately, by the time I left, the company had grown by 8x to over 8 million users.
Okay. And currently, you're working at Pinterest. How are you helping them to grow?
So at Pinterest, I've spent the last 4 years working on the emails and notifications team. Joined as an engineer and eventually moved into managing the team. And there, through emails and notifications, when I first got there, there was maybe a couple different email types we were sending out. They were driving some users back to the product, but we didn't really understand how impactful they were or what we were getting from it. And then over the past 4 years, really have spent the time working to really build out emails and notifications into one of the biggest growth drivers and growth levers for Pinterest. So today, where we're at is we have dozens of different emails and notification types, and every single day they drive back tens of millions of users back to the Pinterest product and drive just a huge amount of engagement and revenue. And one of the big ways that we kind of done that over the past few years is really thinking through what the email experience should be. And one of the principles that was most clarifying for us was thinking of emails and notifications not as this like blank slate where you can just try out wacky ideas, but thinking of it as an extension of the product and thinking through every single notification we send, how can this notification be delivering the Pinterest core value proposition into users' inboxes? And we even think of emails as almost another client for Pinterest, the same way there's an iOS client and an Android client. So we think through the UI and how it reflects the UI of the Pinterest experience. And the other big lever that has been really successful for us is just heavily investing in personalization. So we send a lot of content recommendations. All of those are heavily personalized. And we've also invested heavily into machine learning to predict what is the right email to send to a user, how many emails should we send to a user, what is the right time to re-engage them, and all of that, and using ML models to really personalize people's email and notification experience, and at the same time also optimizing our growth metrics.
In terms of the growth of Pinterest, have you been focusing on certain aspects of the funnel more than others? I mean, email notifications usually is typically more to keep the engagement of the user with the product or to get them to purchase something. So what has been sort of your focus in terms of the funnel for Pinterest?
At Pinterest, we have structured our growth team kind of around our entire growth model. So there's a couple teams working on acquisition. There's a couple of teams working on retention. There's a team working on activation. And at Pinterest, we've been fortunate enough to have a lot of resources. So right now, our engineering team is around 50 to 60 engineers. So we have enough resources to kind of focus on all parts of the funnel. But when I was at Shopcake, our growth team was much smaller. It was just like a handful of engineers. So at Shopcake, what we had to do was pick kind of which part of the funnel to focus on, and it'd be like, okay, this month maybe we're focusing on activation, and then next month we'll go look at invites and work on acquisition. But at sort of Pinterest scale, you think of all parts and really invest in each part of the funnel kind of in commensurate with how much it impacts your ability to grow and your ROI from investing there.
So I'm assuming that you do a lot of experimentation, a lot of tests and growth tests to figure out, what has potential, and then doubling down on the things that really do have potential.
Yeah, definitely. So we have about 5 maybe core teams in growth at Pinterest, and my team alone runs probably around 80 to 100 experiments a quarter. And so you can imagine how many experiments the growth org overall is running.
So let's talk a little bit about the successes that you've had, either on you can also touch the personal side of things, in your life, maybe you had some amazing successes, but mostly in regards to Shopcake, Pinterest, and maybe some other experiences we had.
At Shopcake, there's a few sort of big successes that we had while I was there. A couple of the biggest ones that come to mind was geofence notifications was hugely impactful for us at Shopcake. And Shopcake, just quick background, it was this app where you get points for visiting retail stores we're partnered with, and then you can use those points to get things like gift cards. And so geofence notifications, what we did was when you were near one of our partner stores, we would send you a notification reminding you, hey, you can collect X number of points if you go visit the store when you're within about 100 meters. And we just really believed that this would really materially impact the number of store visits. And so we built it out. And one of the interesting things was when we first built it out, the experiment only showed a few percentage uptick in store visits, which was a lot less than we had been hoping for. But when we really dug into the data, what we came to realize was that it had actually really impacted new user activation a ton. It had increased new user store visits in their first week by something like 20%. And so it was really helping activate new users. And it was also interesting learning for us that our existing user base was already figuring out how to pull out the app, and there wasn't much room to remind them more about visiting stores. So that was a huge win in terms of improving activation. Another big win for us was we almost doubled the number of daily active users on Shopkick overnight just through implementing notifications. And that was also a really big win. We implemented notifications and also badging to basically let you know when there was days where you could collect like a lot more points than normal. We called them like big kick days because our currency were kicks for Shopkick. But doing that helped really increase active users, and we also saw that like translate just down the growth funnel into all our other engagement metrics like store visits and stuff like that. Shifting to Pinterest, some of our big wins there, I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but using machine learning and personalization has just yielded tremendous results in terms of both the user experience, but also really big results in terms of like driving metric results. And so there's kind of been a process over time. What I always recommend to people is don't just start off with trying to like build out a machine learning model. Like every problem that we're using to solve machine learning or using machine learning to solve at Pinterest, at least in the growth team, is always something you can make steps towards just through basic data jobs. So one example is we have a machine learning model that predicts what email to send. But prior to that model, what we did was we just had a static ordering for every user and just ordered them by overall click-through rate. And so there's a lot of things where you don't need to use machine learning from the get-go. You can use like just basic heuristics or stuff like that. But if you see improvement that shows that it's a potential opportunity to use something like machine learning to optimize it. And so using ML at Pinterest over probably the past few years I've been there has resulted in adding millions and millions of active users to the product from the results of those experiments.
Okay, what about failures? Either failures in life, failures in your projects, with the company you've worked. What are some of the biggest failures? And of course, what did you learn from that?
Yeah, one of the biggest failures is actually probably what kind of attracted me to growth, which was soon after I graduated college, a friend and I had this idea for an app. We worked to build it out and then went completely build out a working version. And then once we're done building it, it's like, okay, I guess it's time to launch it. And we had like no idea how to get users. So we like, I think I had like contacted a radio station to figure out if we could do radio ads and like did Google AdWords and spent like a few $1,000s on Google AdWords. And we had absolutely no idea of what we were doing. We had just graduated college, didn't know anything about what we're doing. Also, a lot of the resources around startups and growth weren't really as available back then. And ultimately, it was a really unsuccessful. It was a huge flop. We never got any users that ever stuck around. And that experience, I think, kind of like laid the foundation for me to be interested in growth. And so a couple years later, when I was at Shopkick and they first started the growth team, because I had had this experience where I'd tried to like create something and had no idea how to go about getting users, I saw growth when they started the growth team at Shopkick as an opportunity to really learn how do you grow a startup. And so that was one of the failures that actually long-term got me to like where I am today. A few other failures that come to mind. When we first started the growth team at Shopkick, we would usually figure out what projects to work on just kind of based on gut feeling and just vote on projects. Everyone would vote, and the ones that got the most votes were what we worked on. But we did that for a couple quarters, and we seemed like we were having a lot of success. A lot of experiments shipped that looked like they were impactful, and there were these great percentage gains. But after a couple quarters, we realized we weren't really impacting the bottom line when it came to things like signups or stuff like that. And what we ultimately realized was that when people were voting for their gut, they'd often vote for the areas that they felt the most confident they could make an improvement, which often meant like the areas that were like most broken or really unexplored. But many times that didn't actually line up with what areas were going to be most impactful. So what we learned was that you have to do your due diligence when it comes to like planning, and you have to go and dig into the data and do like impact estimates and opportunity sizing before you embark on some sort of roadmap. And then I'd say probably last big failure that I can talk about was one at Pinterest. So Pinterest, for probably the first year and a half or so, first maybe 2 years I was there, growth team just continued to hit goals like quarter after quarter, continue to crush it. But then in early 2015, there's a few things going on. There's some engineering fires that we had to fight, and we were a bit short resource. And we ended up missing our goal by pretty big margin. But we didn't actually realize we were missing our goal until the end of the quarter when we did our kind of like retrospective and to see how we had done to our goal and report back to leadership. And the fact we had kind of gotten so off track and hadn't even realized it was a bit of a wake-up call for us. And so what we did is we implemented something really simple, which was just we had a team meeting every week. Just the very first slide in that team meeting, we just would put up on the projector what our goal was and how we were tracking to it. And just that simple change to really give people visibility had a huge impact. Not only did everyone like know where we were tracking to goals, whereas before we had just kind of run fast and loose and only checked in at the end of the quarter. It also, whenever we started to drift behind, all the engineers, all the people on the team would immediately start trying to think, okay, what can we do to get back on track? What can we do to get us back on track to the goal? And so since implementing that small change, we've actually been able to consistently hit our goal for something like 10 quarters in a row now.
Is the span of time for your quote unquote sprints or your regular objectives of what you're trying to achieve a certain, like a fixed amount of time? Is it, for example, every 2 weeks you're trying to deliver something, or is it every quarter, like you mentioned? What's kind of the timeline for your objectives?
At Pinterest, we've now moved to about half-year timelines, and the way the growth team runs is the growth team will have some sort of weekly active user goal to hit by the end of the 6 months. And so from there, we break it down into figuring out what individual teams need to deliver. So notifications might sign up for adding like many million weekly active users, and acquisition team will sign up for a different amount of weekly active users. And then from there, each team it's up to them to figure out how to hit that. So on the notification side, we let the team be pretty independent. We'll come up with a lot of project ideas, estimate out the impact and the ROI, and assign out the projects to engineers. But from there, engineers kind of are responsible for running kind of their own personal roadmap and figuring out like other projects they're assigned, what order they want to work on them, and stuff like that. And kind of giving engineers that autonomy and also ownership over their projects has been pretty successful for us. I'd say at least maybe 20 to 30% of the team's impact comes from ideas that engineers come up with on their own projects that weren't things that the product manager or myself thought of. And just kind of building that culture where the engineers feel empowered and they feel ownership over the projects has, I think, helped a lot in terms of just increasing the output and the impact that the team can have.
Another related quick question: do you give, or do you dedicate a certain amount of time, like the Google 20%, 1 day a week, to that specifically for people to have ideas, to work on their own projects, and then contribute to the growth of the company?
We don't have official like 20% time or anything like that. We do occasionally like let engineers go and spend 20% on kind of their own personal projects that might not be tied to growth, but if we think there's some other like impact that it could have, like improving the stability of our systems or stuff like that, we'll do things like that. Generally, when it comes to just projects, if engineer comes up with an idea that wasn't in the roadmap and we think it'll be impactful, we just kind of like update our roadmap on the fly. And so don't even consider that as part of like a 20% or a side project. We'll just update like the list of projects if we think there's a new opportunity to go after. And one last thing is when we do kind of plan our projects, we do actually carve off about a 20% bucket of work for bets that we want to work on, and we specifically don't want to prioritize them based on ROI because we think either maybe there's going to be just some strategic long-term impact, or maybe it's like a kind of a crazy bet that could be really successful or it could be completely nothing. And so carving off that time for bets and then having kind of the rest of our roadmap be incremental work has helped us.
What would be some of the wisdom that you've acquired over the years that you would like to share with people that will be watching this? What would be, for example, your top 3 pieces of advice?
Yeah. So I think number one piece of advice is I talk to startups all the time, and I think a lot of startups sometimes try to think about growth too early. They have just built out their product. They don't have any users yet, and they're trying to figure out what their scalable acquisition strategy is to get millions of users. And what I tell them is to just take things one step at a time. And if you have 0 users, figure out how you're going to get to 1,000 users. If you have 1,000 users, figure out how you're going to get to 5,000. But don't start thinking about like how you're going to build out a scalable acquisition strategy or what your SEO strategy is when you don't have any users to begin with. And also, I think another piece of that is also just making sure you have product market fit. So if you're starting to try and grow something and you haven't even validated that you have product market fit, you're not going to be successful, because you can only retain users if you have product market fit, where they are seeing value and coming back to your product. And trying to grow without that is just going to be a waste of your time. Second piece of advice I would have is to go and talk to your users. I think it can be easy sometimes to just be by yourself in a room or be with like your company in an office and never actually go out and talk to people and really understand how they are perceiving the product or getting insights from your users. And I think going out and talking to users, especially for early stage companies, can be incredibly valuable in terms of helping you understand your user base, helping you understand more broadly, not just how they're using your product, but also, who they are as people, and maybe where you could, those insights could help you figure out where you can get more of them. And then I think the third biggest piece of advice is, I think in growth, it can sometimes be easy to fool yourself into the perception that you're making progress when you aren't actually really driving results for the bottom line. I talked a little bit about it earlier when I was at Shopkick, but we used to just report out results in terms of percentage gains on experiments. And since we were working on a lot of the areas that we felt were broken, we were always getting these great percentage gains because we would fix something that hadn't really been explored before, but it wasn't actually really driving huge increases in terms of signups or active users. And so what we've done at Pinterest is every experiment we run, we report out exactly how many weekly active users we expect it to add. And it'll be like, experiment 1, we expect to add 50,000 weekly active users. Experiment 2, we expect to add 100,000. And by reporting out results that are like in the same units as like the company's bottom line that the company cares about, it helps you really make sure you're driving impact rather than kind of feeling like you're driving impact when you might not actually be driving results.
And what about some tools and resources that you would like people to check out that you think are useful to grow a business?
Yeah, I think we're kind of lucky now that there's a lot of content, a lot more content out there than when I first started. So I think my advice is to go look at people who worked on the type of growth that that you need to be successful. So if you're a product-driven company where you're building a consumer internet product, going and seeing people who've worked on growth at companies like LinkedIn or Facebook or Pinterest, and going and seeing people who've really been successful, I think can help give you a lot of insight, whether it's through videos like these or maybe their blogs or other stuff. And similarly, if you're maybe working on paid acquisition, there's a lot of great people out there who've had success with paid. And I think the one thing is just be careful who you take advice from, because I've seen some advice published out there on growth from smaller companies that maybe didn't have enough data to really get significance or the insights to back up the insights that they thought they came up with. And when we've tried out those things at Pinterest, we've seen them not work. And I know other companies at scale have also seen some advice not work as well. So just also be careful who you take advice from.
So the last question I have for you is, what's your call to action for the people in the community of business growth geniuses or other people that will be watching this? What would you like them to do, either related to Pinterest or anything else? What's your call to action?
Well, Pinterest has a great advertising product. So if you're interested in doing paid acquisition or paid re-engagement, and definitely go and check out Pinterest ad product. We're still pretty early. We've been building out the ad product for about 2 years now, but we're quickly catching up to Facebook and Google in terms of sophistication. But also, I think there's a lot of opportunity for advertisers to get really good ROI on Pinterest, because a lot of people who use Pinterest don't quite know exactly what they want to do yet. And so they're using Pinterest to explore different ideas. And we've seen some research reports that we've done with our partners, and they say Pinterest has, on average, knows a user is going to make a purchasing decision 3 weeks earlier than Facebook or Google does. So it's a great opportunity for advertisers to really shape a consumer's purchasing intent.
So in that regards, do you target different markets, certain markets, for example, e-commerce, is that more relevant, or is there certain industries that would be more relevant to use your ad product?
Yeah, so Pinterest has a lot of different verticals. Some of our most popular ones are stuff around food and drink, home decor, fashion and beauty, travel. All of those are some of our most popular verticals.
Fantastic. John, thank you so much for doing this. It's been a pleasure. I've been looking forward to doing it. So have a wonderful day.
Thank you. It's been great chatting.
Talk to you soon.